And we're in, I believe I said 9.3. Cool. So when we're talking about cells, before we get to the cancery parts, we need to talk about the end of life for a cell. They kind of have two options. The first option is a cell dying. Usually this occurs when it gets some sort of trauma. So it gets like crushed or squished or cut open, or if it gets infected by something, it will burst open, kind of explode, spew its guts everywhere. The nucleus floats around aimlessly until it gets gobbled up by something or reabsorbed by the body. The problem with this is this would be similar to you like walking into a room that's kind of like not a haunted house, and you saw like blood on the walls and guts everywhere, right? It would be pretty terrifying. You might like go and call the cops, right? Well, cells do the same thing, right? If a cell nearby is blown apart, it'll notice. And it'll go, oh wait, this means that there's probably an infection going on or something going on, so it'll start like an immune response or be like, oh, let's start doing inflammation, whatever it is. Your body begins that sort of like response. The more common method of your cells actually dying is they're kind of like end of life. This is like in the nursing home, going through like palliative care of some kind. They actually are taken apart. And it's a very orderly fashion. The nucleus is taken apart. All the organelles are taken apart. Instead of just exploding everywhere, they're kind of shut down piece by piece and then recycled, all their parts recycled. And this process is called apoptosis. Also known as programmed cell death. It's kind of like cell suicide in a lot of ways. So why might your cells need to go through apoptosis? Any ideas? Yes?
Like a regrowth of skin cells?
So regrowing is one thing, but what about programmed cell death? Why might they want to die?
Because they're like old.
Okay, because they're old. Yeah, old is a good reason. What was yours?
It's an extra cell, but is it needed?
Yeah, not needed. I'm gonna put not needed. That's fine. Any other reasons why a cell might want to not be around anymore? Emery? Infected, yeah, infected. Aaron, what was that?
Huh?
Did you have one?
What?
You were saying something. What was it?
Oh no, it's something different.
Old, not needed, infected. What was the video we just watched?
Cancer.
Cancer, yeah. If a cell thinks it might become cancerous, it can initiate apoptosis. So for the not needed one here, classic example for apoptosis is when you're a fetus and your hand is growing, right? Here's your thumb. You actually have webbing between your fingers. So your hand looks something like that, like a big webbed hand. And then as you grow and develop, the tissue in that webbing separates. And you get the beautiful fingers like that. draw a better hand. But the point is the tissue in between your fingers actually breaks down, and those cells have to basically commit apoptosis, right? So they're taken apart and that tissue is reused for other things. But it also comes into play with something like cancer too. All right, where do new cells come from?
Parts of the old one.
The building blocks for the new cells, yeah, can come from old ones or from the food you eat. But what about the cells themselves? Nobody knows. Have you heard of stem cells before?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got two types of stem cells. We have adult stem cells. And we have embryonic stem cells. Adult stem cells are pluripotent. Whereas embryonic stem cells are omnipotent. So let's break down these words real quick. What does potent mean? Yeah, it says similar to strong. It means powerful, right? So if you have a really like potent concoction, it's a really powerful thing, right? So potent means power. What does plural mean? Multiple, exactly. So multiple, more than one. So these have the power to become more than one. So a classic example is a blood cell, I guess. Your blood cells reside in your bones. You have these stem cells or stem blood cells that can go on to become like an erythrocyte, like a red blood cell, but they can also become a white blood cell, or they can become a whole bunch of other like immune cells, like beta cells or T cells or something like that, right? So you have all these types of blood cells, immune cells, that this one stem cell can become. However, it can't become like a nerve cell.
Why are white blood cells called white blood cells?
Because they don't contain hemoglobin, which makes red blood cells red. Whereas embryonic stem cells, what does omni mean? Not one, it means all. Like omniscient, right? All-knowing. Omnipotent means all-powerful. So these are all-powerful cells, which means they can not only become like a red blood cell if they need to, or a white blood cell if they need to, but these guys can become other completely different types of cells, right? They can become like epithelial cells, they can become liver cells, they can become platelets, they can even become like neurons, right? Anything from your liver to neuron to like eyeball tissue, whatever it is, omnipotent stem cells can become absolutely anything. When you're doing, let's say I was a scientist doing research on stem cells in the United States, and I wanted to like look at using stem cells to like cure bodies or something like that, or I'm doing tests on stem cells. Would I use adult stem cells or embryonic stem cells? I'm actually not allowed to use embryonic stem cells. It is illegal for me to do tests on embryonic stem cells. Why? Embryonic stem cells can become every single tissue type, including everything required to make a person, right? So embryonic stem cells are potentially people, right? They can become people if they were implanted properly, like in a uterus type thing. So embryonic stem cells have these moral, like ethical questions around them. So in the United States, it's illegal to use embryonic stem cells for stem cell research, but we've actually gotten really good at using adult stem cells. These pluripotent cells, we're actually pretty good with our current level of research to turn back the clock on them a little bit and make them more omnipotent. It's pretty cool. Okay, so we're gonna do some review on some of the stuff we did last week. Remember our cell cycle? We're gonna draw that. Like that, there you go. And we had 3 distinct sections. Do you remember what the names of the sections were? Any of them? Prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase are all part of?
Interface.
No, interphase is the big one down here.
Metaphase?
Give it a shot.
No, this is good. No, this is good, good, good. Interphase is before prophase, metaphase, interphase, telophase, which are all part of.
DNA doubling.
That happens earlier on.
I don't know.
Oh, we did a whole lab on it, guys. Starts with an M. Mitosis. Perfect. And then after mitosis, the last little bit is cytokinesis. Perfect. Okay, this is just review. Remember, this is G1, this is S phase, this is G2. Okay, boom, boom, boom. We're gonna add to this a little bit. We're gonna learn about 2 proteins. There's a protein in your body, in every single one of your cells. It hangs out around the nucleus, and there's a whole bunch of them. I'm going to give you the full name of it. I think you guys can handle it. It's called cyclin dependent kinase. So it's a big mouthful of a name. We're going to abbreviate it as CDK. But it's this protein that's requiring a signal in order for it to let this cell cycle progress. And the signal is a little molecule, a little bit smaller, it's a big molecule, but it's a smaller protein than the cyclin-dependent kinase, or the CDK. It's cyclin. So in your cell, you have your cyclin. In order to begin even G1 phase, that cyclin needs to bind to the CDK. Once it binds, then that signals the cell, okay, it's fine to start G1. So it'll start G1, but it'll go through G1. At the end of G1, at the start of the S phase, same sort of deal. The CDK needs to bind to cyclin in order to do the S phase, Start of G2, CDK, cyclin. And then for mitosis, the CDK needs to bind to cyclin as well. So it won't progress to the next phase until it gets the go-ahead, the chemical go-ahead from the rest of the cell. There's one other piece to this, and it's these checkpoints. So you not only have this thing kind of like initiating and starting the cell each step, you also have these checkpoints at the end, which need to occur. I'm just going to draw them as question marks. They usually happen at the end of each phase before the next one starts. Including the end of mitosis, there's another checkpoint. Yep, sorry. Oh, other way? I don't care as much if you memorize the placements of these. What I care about is you know that these occur during the cell cycle, that both CDKs and cyclins have to bind in order to initiate each step. And then these other checkpoints, if the conditions are not met, then apoptosis begins, or apoptosis. Apoptosis occurs. So as the cell does its G1 phase, remember G1 is it's growing, it's making new organelles. At the end, it'll check, oh, did I do that properly? If yes, then it continues, right? And then it does the S phase. What happens during the S phase? What's synthesized? DNA, yep. So the cell makes a copy of every single chromosome, but it gets to the end and it goes, oops, I forgot to copy one of the chromosomes. What does it do? No, it doesn't. In this case, if it gets to this checkpoint, this is the big final exam, and it fails the test. Or in this case, it has to get like 100%. If it doesn't get everything exactly right, What does the cell do?
Apoptosis.
Apoptosis. It just dies, right? You have trillions of cells in your body. If you lose 1 or 2 cells, not a big deal. What happens though if it messes up the DNA, passes the checkpoint, and has messed up DNA? What does it give you?
Cancer.
Yeah, it gives you cancer or something like that, right? It's not worth the risk to have a cell out there that incorrectly does this. So the cell goes through apoptosis if it messes up at one of these checkpoints. Cool. All right, let's talk about cancer. So our kind of classic definition for cancer is uncontrolled cell growth, right? But what leads to that lack of control? What creates the proteins that, including CDK, cyclin, and these checkpoint proteins? What encodes for those proteins? What runs the cell? The nucleus. What's in the nucleus? What was it?
Membrane?
Inside the membrane of the nucleus is all of your
Organelles.
chromosomes, which are made out of DNA. Yeah. So all of your DNA is necessary, or we'll put it this way. Cancer is caused by changes in your DNA or damage to your DNA. So where do you get this damage to your DNA from? Any ideas on what damages DNA?
Hereditary.
All right, hold on. So some of it you can inherit. It's a bad marker. I gotta look. Inherit. Okay, so you can inherit some damaged DNA. That's fine. What else?
From like radiation.
Radiation. Cool. Yeah, radiation, including ultraviolet radiation, right? You can get like any ionizing radiation, so X-rays, things like that. Hanging out at Chernobyl. What else?
Sometimes it's just like they're like unlock,
Unluck. I won't put mutation. You can have copy errors. So we mentioned how like some of those errors can slip through. It's really rare. Your body's pretty good about checking it. Every single cell is pretty good, but sometimes you can have copy errors when it copies DNA.
How does this skin cancer start like this?
It comes from radiation, UV light, right? Will give you skin cancer.
Makes me wonder.
What else causes cancer? Think about it in broad terms.
Certain diseases.
Diseases, yeah, so actually viruses. Some viruses can cause cancer, right? Like HPV. That's a virus, it damages your DNA. What else can cause cancer?
Nicotine.
Nicotine, yeah, so we're gonna go really broad group here, chemicals. Remember, not all chemicals are bad. A lot of them are healthy or good for you, like, you know, protein and whatever. All that's chemicals. But some chemicals, including things like nicotine, alcohol, asbestos, nitrates. You guys know what asbestos is? It's like an insulation in old buildings. They used to use it, but it's actually a natural product. You can just like mine it straight out of the ground, right? So, is nicotine natural?
No.
Yeah, you bet. It's natural. You just grow it in a plant, right? Tobacco leaves. So don't be fooled into thinking like, oh, it's not natural. It's natural, therefore it's healthy, right? Some of the biggest carcinogens out there are natural things. Cool. When you get old, that damages your DNA too, because these things start to add up. So just a reminder on the cells. I'm going to draw some cells here. if let's say for a second that this cell dies, and so this cell's like, oh, I'm going to go through mitosis and take its place. So it regrows that cell, but then it messes up and it goes, oops, I now have enough errors in my DNA for whatever reason to start this cancerous process, right? So it grows again, and then each of those cells grows again. What's going to happen after a little while? Yeah, you'll get like a tumor thing. But if it's just a few cells, it's not necessarily like a really bad tumor, right? In fact, a lot of cancerous things, like you remember how in the video they're talking about how like most people have like a little bit of cancer or weird cells that are growing. Like a mole on your skin, right, can be a growth that's kind of uncontrolled, right? But if it keeps going and going and going, that's skin cancer. But if it just stops after a little while, it's not a huge issue.
I have a story from when I had pre-cancer. I probably still have
Pre-cancer, you said?
it. Yeah. I went to several different doctors and they didn't know what the heck it was on my foot. So I had to keep going to different doctors until I went to a dermatologist finally.
Yeah.
And they knew what it was after they sent it to a lab.
Yeah, so you can have these like, growths on your skin. You just keep an eye on them. If they continue to grow really quickly, if they're like irregular shaped, things like that, a dermatologist will go, oh yeah, isn't it cancer yet, but it's kind of pre-cancerous. It could become cancerous, so oftentimes they'll burn them off or cut them out or something like that.
They cut it off and then they had to cut out some of my foot.
Yeah, because they don't want to leave a little bit behind, so they have to cut out a little bit. One of the links between like a fast-growing tumor and just like a random growth is whether or not blood vessels are growing into it. So you see how I drew these blood vessels growing into it? Once the tumor gets those blood vessels growing into it, then it gets a whole bunch of sugar and oxygen and things like that, and then it can grow really quickly sometimes. So there's a big spectrum in cancer. Some are worse than others. Okay, we're gonna pause there on the notes. You can put that away.